Have you ever wondered why, the moment someone hurts you, your instinct isn't to fight, but to disappear? There is a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It withdraws. It contracts. It pulls you inward like a dark tide, dragging you into the deepest part of yourself. And if you are someone who disconnects when you are hurt, you already know this feeling too well. It happens quietly, almost invisibly. One moment you are present, responding, participating, and in the next, something inside you shuts down. You feel yourself slipping away from conversations, from people, from responsibilities, and even from your own emotions. You don't choose to detach. The detachment chooses you. But why? Why do some people retreat into silence the moment they feel emotional pain, while others lash out, negotiate, argue, or demand explanations? Why does your mind decide that disappearing is the safest place to be? Psychologically, emotional withdrawal is far more complex than simple avoidance. It is a survival response, one shaped by years of invisible experiences, subtle wounds, and silent expectations. People who disconnect often grew up learning that emotional expression was unsafe, pointless, or misunderstood. Maybe when they were younger, their feelings were dismissed as exaggeration. Maybe they were told to be strong, to get over it, or to stop being dramatic. Maybe vulnerability was punished or ignored. And so, without ever consciously deciding to, they built an inner world where silence felt safer than confrontation, and distance felt safer than honesty. But here's the truth most people never realize. When you disconnect, you're not pushing others away. You're protecting yourself from what feels like an emotional impact too heavy to absorb. When someone wounds you, especially someone you trust, your nervous system doesn't think, it reacts. It begins shutting down channels of connection so the pain cannot spread deeper. This shutdown is not coldness, it is overload. And it often begins with questions you don't say out loud. Why did they say that? Am I overreacting? Why does this hurt so much? If I speak up, will it even matter? These internal questions spiral until the safest option seems to be silence. The safe zone becomes solitude. The instructions from your mind sound like, pull back, go quiet, don't trust this moment. And you obey, not because you're weak, but because you are wired to protect yourself from further injury. People who disconnect are often among the most introspective and emotionally intelligent. They feel deeply. They observe details others ignore. They understand the emotional temperature of a room with uncanny precision. But that sensitivity comes at a cost. The smallest shift in tone, expression, or energy can feel like an emotional earthquake, and so you retreat before the ground fully cracks. But there is something even deeper. You disconnect not only to avoid pain, but to regain control. When everything feels too heavy, too confusing, too fast, your withdrawal becomes a kind of reset button, a place where no one can reach you, judge you, or demand explanations you are not ready to give. In this private space, you can think, you can breathe, you can piece together what actually hurt you. Because often the pain is not only what was said, but what it echoed inside your memory. Many people misunderstand this behavior. They think you're being dramatic, or punishing, or manipulative, but they are wrong. You are not disconnecting to hurt others. You disconnect because you don't know how to stay present in a moment that feels emotionally unsafe. And here's the part most people never see. While you appear calm or distant on the outside, your inner world is loud. Thoughts multiply. Emotions swirl. You analyze every detail, every word, every implication. You replay the moment over and over, trying to understand why it affected you so powerfully. The withdrawal is not emptiness. It is overwhelm. But withdrawal becomes a problem when it becomes a pattern. When every wound, every disappointment, every moment of tension leads you into hiding. The wall that once protected you becomes the prison that isolates you. And yet, even in that isolation, there is a question that haunts people like you. Why am I like this? Why can't I just explain what I feel? Why do I disappear every time I get hurt? These questions matter, because the answers are not simple. They are rooted in emotional history, psychological wiring, and the deep hidden belief that your feelings are too fragile or too burdensome to be shared. In the next part, we will go even deeper into the emotional mechanics behind this behavior, uncovering why the mind chooses silence over expression, and how these patterns form long before adulthood. But before we continue, I want you to sit with one question, quietly, honestly, without running from it. Do I disconnect because I don't trust others, or because I don't trust myself when I'm hurt? There is a moment in the emotional withdrawal cycle that most people never become aware of, a moment when your mind begins quietly building a story about what the pain means. And for people who disconnect when they're hurt, this story is almost always shaped by self-protection. When someone hurts you, your first reaction is not anger, confrontation, or assertiveness. It is interpretation. You start searching for the meaning behind the wound before you even realize you're doing it. Every hurtful experience triggers your internal evaluation system, one that was built slowly over years of emotional exposure. You don't simply ask, "Why did they say that?" You ask, "What does this say about me?" You don't just wonder, "Why did they act like that?" You wonder, "Was I too much? Not enough? Did I misread everything again?" And because these questions feel overwhelming, your instinct is to pull away to create emotional distance. This distance gives you room to analyze, to think, to breathe, and to stabilize. But it also creates something dangerous if left unchecked, a feedback loop of self-doubt. Emotional withdrawal temporarily protects you, but it also feeds the belief that you are hard to understand, that your feelings are inconvenient, or that expressing yourself will only make things worse. And once this belief becomes a habit, silence becomes your first language. People often assume that those who withdraw are cold or detached, but the truth is the opposite. You withdraw because you feel too deeply, not too little. Your emotional system absorbs subtle details others overlook. The shift in someone's tone, the hesitation in their voice, the minor change in their facial expression. You interpret these micro-signals instantly, almost automatically, and often, painfully. This hyper-awareness is a sign of a highly tuned emotional radar, a trait frequently seen in people who grew up needing to read the room to stay safe. Maybe you learned that moods changed quickly around you. Maybe you had to anticipate reactions to avoid conflict. Maybe you were praised for being mature for your age, not realizing that what others called maturity was really emotional vigilance. So now, when someone hurts you, your body responds before your mind can catch up. The shutdown is not a conscious decision. It is a conditioned protection mechanism, a shield you built long before you ever needed it in adulthood. But let's explore something deeper, the silence after the hurt. When you disconnect, a psychological transformation happens inside you. You enter a state of internal processing that most people wouldn't survive for long because it's too intense. You replay the moment that hurt you. You analyze every detail. You imagine alternative outcomes. You question your perception. You dissect the situation until you reach the point where nothing feels certain anymore, not even your own feelings. In this silence, you are not inactive. You are overwhelmed. You are restructuring the emotional world inside you. And this cognitive overload is the reason you cannot speak yet. People who disconnect are not running away. They are recalibrating. But here comes a hidden truth rarely acknowledged. Disconnecting when hurt is not only about protection, it is also about dignity. You don't want to react impulsively, say something harmful, or expose a vulnerable part of yourself that others can mishandle. Silence feels like the only space where your emotions remain fully yours. And yet, this silence is misunderstood. Maybe people accuse you of ignoring them. Maybe they say you're distant, cold, or uninvested. Maybe they think you don't care. But if they could see what happens inside you, they would understand that your withdrawal is the opposite of indifference. It is your way of caring so much that you need to step back before the emotion swallows everything. Now, I want to do aquilo que você pediu para esta parte. If you've ever disconnected to protect yourself, leave a comment saying, "I do this without meaning to." This simple sentence helps you recognize your own patterns, and it reminds you that you are not alone. Now, let's go deeper. Emotional withdrawal often begins long before the moment of hurt. It begins with a quiet fear, the fear of being misunderstood. For people like you, being misunderstood is not a small discomfort. It is a wound. Because your emotional world is rich, layered, and complex, and few people ever get close enough to see its depth. When someone misinterprets your intentions or your feelings, it hits you harder than it hits most people. It feels like a distortion of your truth. And so, withdrawing becomes a way to protect your truth, to avoid explaining yourself over and over, to avoid the exhaustion of emotional translation, to avoid the pain of being unseen. But this leads to a paradox. You long for connection, yet your instinct is to retreat. You crave understanding, yet you disappear when you feel misunderstood. You want closeness, yet you feel safest alone. This paradox is one of the defining features of people who disconnect when hurt. They are deeply emotional, but selectively expressive. They are introspective but guarded. They are sensitive but strong. They are present but silent. And the more sensitive someone is, the more likely they are to withdraw after being wounded, because their emotional system needs longer to recover. Some people heal through talking. People like you often heal through space, but space can become isolation, and isolation can become a habit, and a habit can become a personality. The danger is not in disconnecting. The danger is in forgetting how to reconnect. In the next part, we will explore exactly that. How people who disconnect can learn to open up without feeling exposed, how they can set boundaries without disappearing, and how they can stay present even when the moment feels emotionally threatening. Before seguirmos, quero que você reflita sobre isso. When you disconnect, are you trying to protect the relationship or protect yourself from a version of the relationship that hurts? There comes a moment in every pattern when awareness begins to turn into clarity. For people who disconnect when they're hurt, that moment is subtle, almost imperceptible at first. It begins with the quiet realization that withdrawing may protect you, but it also keeps you from experiencing the very connections you long for. And this is where the deeper psychological work begins. To understand your pattern, you must understand the emotional architecture behind it, the beliefs, associations, and memories that shape the instinct to retreat, not the story you tell others, the story you tell yourself. Most people assume that withdrawing is simply a fear of conflict. But the truth is far more complex. It is rarely about conflict itself. It is about the emotional vulnerability that conflict exposes. Vulnerability that you may never have been taught to handle. Vulnerability that was, at some point in your life, met with criticism, dismissal, or silence. This makes any emotionally charged moment feel like stepping into unstable terrain. You don't know which version of yourself will appear, the one who stays calm and introspective, or the one who shuts down completely, and so you retreat before the emotional earthquake even happens. But withdrawing is not always the problem. Not knowing how to come back is. When you disconnect, you enter a psychological space that feels controlled, safe, quiet, a place where you don't have to defend your feelings or translate them, a place where you can breathe again. But this space can also become too comfortable, too familiar, too protective. The longer you stay there, the harder it becomes to re-enter the world outside. People often mistake your silence for indifference, but the silence is not empty. It is full of thoughts, interpretations, emotional currents moving beneath the surface. You are not ignoring the world. You are analyzing it from a distance. You are examining the wound before letting anyone touch it. And because your inner world is so rich, your emotional processing takes longer than most people can understand. You don't just feel hurt. You break it down piece by piece, layer by layer. You look at the intention, the tone, the history, the meaning. You analyze what it awakened in you. You connect it to past experiences, relationships, fears. You take a single moment of pain and turn it into an entire landscape of interpretation. This depth is your gift, and also your burden. But that raises an essential question. How do you reconnect after withdrawing without feeling exposed, unstable, or misunderstood? The first step is understanding that your silence is not only a reaction, it is a message you may not be consciously sending, but one that others are receiving nonetheless. When you shut down, people often feel confused, guilty, or excluded. They do not see your internal storm, they only see your absence. The challenge is that the moment you disconnect is rarely the moment you're ready to explain. You need time, you need space, you need distance to make sense of what you feel, and so the emotional gap widens, not because you want it to, but because you don't know how to shorten it without losing your emotional footing. For people like you, communication is not a simple act. It is a high-risk decision, because expressing yourself means revealing a part of your inner world that you've spent years protecting, and the idea of someone mishandling that vulnerability feels almost unbearable. So how do you stay present without losing yourself? The answer lies in emotional pacing. You don't need to share everything at once. You don't need to explain yourself before you're ready. You don't need to force connection when your mind still feels unsafe. But you do need to take one step back toward the world each time you retreat. Even a small step, a message, a short explanation, a moment of honesty, something that signals, I'm here, I just need a little time. Because when you withdraw without any signal, people fill the silence with their own fears. They assume the worst. They imagine they did something unforgivable. And this creates a cycle in which your silence triggers their insecurity, and their insecurity reinforces your withdrawal. Breaking this cycle doesn't require speaking your deepest emotions. It requires speaking your simplest ones. Something like, I'm overwhelmed. I need space, but I'm not leaving. Or, I'm processing. I'll talk when I can think clearly. These small sentences can change the entire dynamic of your relationships. They protect your emotional boundaries without disappearing behind them. They allow you to manage your sensitivity without isolating yourself. They help others understand you without demanding explanations you're not ready to give. But reconnection is not only about communication, it is also about trust. Trust in yourself. People who withdraw often don't trust their emotional reactions. They fear saying the wrong thing, being misunderstood, or being seen as too intense. They fear hurting others unintentionally. They fear losing control. But your emotions are not a threat. They are information. And learning to trust them is the key to staying connected even when you feel vulnerable. This is the deeper psychological journey. Not eliminating your instinct to withdraw, but learning to return without feeling emotionally exposed. Because withdrawing is not the problem. Staying gone is. Before continuarmos, quero que você se faça uma pergunta honesta. Do I disconnect because I need space to understand my feelings, or because I'm afraid of revealing them? A resposta a essa pergunta muda tudo. Reconnection is often misunderstood as an act of returning to others. But for people who disconnect when they're hurt, reconnection begins long before that. It starts with returning to yourself. The truth is that withdrawing is not a flaw. It's a response. A survival strategy created in a time when your emotions didn't feel safe in someone else's hands. You learned to retreat because retreating worked. Retreating protected you. Retreating gave you the illusion of control when your inner world felt too heavy to carry openly. But with time, this survival strategy becomes something else. A lens that shapes how you relate to the world. And in this final part, we are not here to judge the pattern. You already do that enough. We are here to understand how to step out of it gently without feeling exposed, rushed, or overwhelmed. Because healing, for someone like you, is not about stopping your instinct to withdraw. It is about strengthening your instinct to return. Let's look deeper. When you disconnect, your internal world becomes louder. Thoughts overlap, emotions intensify, and every memory echoes through the moment like a quiet thunder. People on the outside may think you've shut down. But inside, you're in a state of emotional overprocessing, piecing together logic, meaning, safety, and self-worth. This depth is your strength, but it can also trap you. You may think, if I come back too soon, I'll say something wrong. If I explain myself, I'll be misunderstood again. If I open up, the pain might repeat. And these fears are not irrational. They're learned. But here's the paradox that often defines people like you. You isolate to protect your emotions. But in that isolation, your emotions grow louder, not quieter. You disappear to avoid overstimulation, but the silence becomes overstimulating on the inside. You create distance to feel safe, but the distance becomes a reminder of what you fear losing. Reconnection isn't about eliminating these fears. It's about creating small bridges between your inner world and the outer one. Bridges soft enough to cross without pressure and strong enough to hold your emotional weight. Let's explore these bridges. The first bridge is self-recognition. When you withdraw, do you recognize the moment it happens? Or do you only realize it after you've already disappeared? Self-recognition allows you to stay aware of the emotional threshold that triggers your retreat. This awareness creates space, not the isolating kind, but the grounding kind. The second bridge is gentle communication. Not explanations, not emotional essays, not full vulnerability, just something like, I'm overwhelmed, but I'm here. Or, I need time, but I'm not gone. These sentences protect your boundaries without creating emotional distance. They let others know you're processing, not abandoning. The third bridge is emotional pacing. You don't need to return all at once. Reconnection is not a leap. It's a series of steps. One small share, one small moment of openness. one small truth spoken without fear. This pacing allows you to re-enter emotionally charged spaces without losing yourself. And the fourth bridge, the most important one, is trust. Not trust in others. Trust in yourself. Trust that your emotions are manageable. Trust that your voice is valid. Trust that your presence won't break anything. Trust that you can stay without drowning. Because the truth is, your emotional depth is not a weakness. It's a rare form of intelligence. But intelligence without trust becomes fear. Depth without trust becomes distance. Sensitivity without trust becomes silence. Now, here is the final insight. People who disconnect when hurt understand pain at a level most others never reach. But they also understand healing at a level most others never attempt. The same depth that makes you withdraw is the depth that makes you capable of extraordinary connection. When you feel safe enough to stay. If you've watched this far, it means something inside you recognizes this pattern. Maybe it even recognizes itself in these words. And that is not a small thing. That is awareness. That is courage. That is the beginning of self-ownership. Now, before finalizarmos, aqui está o pedido final exatamente como você pediu. If this video spoke to you in any way, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments from which city you're watching. And if you watched until the very end, write the secret word, stillness, so I know you made it here. And when this video ends, make sure to watch the videos on the final screen. They were chosen to help you go deeper into your own psychology and emotional patterns. You don't need to stop disconnecting. You only need to learn how to return, and you will.